Um, we have a number of things we want to talk about today. Our keynote speaker will be AJ Reyes to talk about any questions you may have about the lake. One of the things I wanted to just mention before we start is that we're going to have a zero increase on our district taxes.
Yeah.
We at the budget meeting we were at about 1.9% increase, and we managed to get it down to zero. So. But not all is rosy. Next year is the contract for the sanitation, so we don't know what that's going to cost. We hopefully will have more than one bidder, and I know we have a couple of prospective bidders that are interested in bidding on it. So hopefully, when it goes out and comes back, we'll have less of a sticker shock than we anticipate. But so I really don't want to spend a lot of time just chattering, so I'll introduce AJ Reyes, and he can come up, and if anybody has any questions for him, or if AJ, if you have something you want to start off with, be my guest.
Stand right here.
Yeah, we're the biggest.
Awesome.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I always love to come out to this beach and at this time of year to speak to your group. This is, I think, the biggest group that I've ever had here. It's not due to me at all. It's definitely the weather. But my name is AJ Reyes. I'm an aquatic ecologist and certified lake manager, and I've been the lake manager for Roaring Brook Lake since about 2019. For anyone who doesn't know me, I've actually grew up in Putnam Valley. I grew up on the northern end of Lake Oscawana, so I'm very familiar with this area, Roaring Brook, and a lot of the lakes in the area. So I've been in charge of the water quality monitoring and associated lake management concerns of Roaring Brook Lake. That some years is aquatic plants, which is definitely this year. It is fisheries, it is beach management, and those sorts of things. So I'm gonna hit a few things quickly and some high level stuff, and then we can open it up for some questions. The very first thing I wanted to talk about is actually, not so much a limnology in lake management question, but I wanted to talk about Park Beach. So just to give a quick history on Park Beach, that was a beach that was continuously losing sand for many, many years, where the sand would need to be continuously replaced over time. So your group in the town of Putnam Valley asked us to go do an assessment of the options that could be available to potentially reduce the amount of sand that's used in the area on the beach, or to basically get at the goal of keeping that beach usable throughout the entire year. When the sand gets moved away from that beach, it does expose some angular rock, which can be problems for small kids that are wading and so on. So we looked at a few different options, and the options included like a do nothing option. An option included a kind of bare minimum sort of raking of the angular rock material to kind of expose the more finer sand material that's under. Another option was translocating sand from the northern end of the beach back onto the beach, which I'll talk about that option a little bit more. Another option was potentially bringing new sand in from an outside source to the beach to sort of supplement what is being lost to the lake. There was another option of potentially putting some sort of a structure in the water around the beach to help retain the sand that's in there. I'm going to talk about a lot here, but I have a report coming out very soon that's going to detail all of this, so you don't need to, remember all of this at the moment. So I'll kind of just jump to the conclusion and talk about that a little bit. Basically, when we looked at all these options, we think that what makes the most sense in terms of expectation of success and costing, and also permittability, which is important, it needs to be able to be actually done, is continuing to take the sand that is continuously moved up north and put it back onto the beach. Now put the sand back on the beach, but also rake out that beach area to keep it clean. This is the reason why. One, when we had our initial conversations with DEC, they were very clear on one thing. They do not want anything placed below the mean high water line, and that includes new sand. Above the high water line, it's out of their jurisdiction to place material, but you can't place below. So any options of putting new sand in that area that people would be wading are basically off the table, unless DEC decides to change their stance on it. So when we looked at the lake when it was drawn down, it was pretty clear that the movement of that sand was mostly, not being 100% of the way, but mostly moving north onto the peninsula. You could see that because we have some pictures of the large sand dune at the very tip of Park Beach. And the idea is that the prevailing waves are pushing north, and pushing that material slowly further up. There is some material that's getting lost like off the beach and into deeper water, right? That is something, but the vast majority of it's being pushed up onto the north end. So the idea is, and this is what we broached with DEC, is that if we just put that material that's already in the lake just back onto the beach area, is that going to be a big issue? And they said no. So that was what we initially got the first permit to do. And looking at the other options, it doesn't seem like there's anything else that has come out that is a better solution than that. Quickly talking about like a potential permanent structure, DEC feels a very similar way to like putting sand as versus a permanent structure to potentially keep the sand in that area. Also too, if you put a permanent structure, maybe like a set of coir logs or some sort of a coffer dam, there's a ton of other permitting that needs to go into place with the health department, and then you have swimming risks. That would be something that potentially could be achieved, but it may just be a little bit overkill for what you're trying to truly achieve at that beach. Once again, also, we don't even know if DEC will say yes, because one of the ways that DEC weighs permits is they weigh it not so much in they're not just looking at how much negative impact it could have. They're also looking at what benefit can be received in exchange for that negative impact. So when you put a particular barrier at the bottom of the beach and that sand is just stopping, let's say it's still moving, but it's stopping, let's say at some northern point, you're still going to have to move that sand back on, or you're going to have to do something else with that sand. That barrier there is not keeping the entire beach flush with sand for the entire time. So in our opinion, the only difference you're getting with putting a barrier is moving the sand. You don't have to move the sand an extra 20 feet, because if most of it's moving to the north, you're just going to get the wheelbarrows, move it back, and put it back on. So we did look at a few other smaller options besides that, but that was kind of what we came up with, is the idea that if the drawdown is still able to happen and you're able to move that sand back onto the beach, and you're able to rake as well, the beach still should have usability over time. Now, this doesn't mean we can't broach the question with the DEC in the future. All right, maybe we're just running out of sand from that northern area, and then maybe that's a question we can talk about with the DEC in terms of, will you allow a limited amount of clean, washed sand that's going to be as environmentally inert as possible to supplement this? But that would sort of be a once every 5-year, 10-year process, not like a once every year, which I think is what the DEC is concerned about. They're coming from that perspective of, if you put sand into a lake, that sand's going to get washed away. It's going to impact fisheries. It's going to impact spawning, impact other wildlife. So their perspective is, we want to do almost nothing. But if we said, hey, over 5 years, we don't have a reservoir of sand anymore. If we just put a small amount in, can that be allowed? That may be an argument that would be tenable for them in the future. So that's all I have to say on Park Beach. We could talk, maybe we have some quick questions before I move on to the actual lake itself.
Have they done this before on Park Beach? I feel like they have tried this.
So in past years, there has been times where there have been that sand has been put on. It's either put on above or below. I think it's
reclamation. I think
yeah.
we're talking about. Yeah, we've done it in the past.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Did
it's not new.
it work for a
Yeah,
while?
no, it works.
It does.
I think this summer was beautiful.
Okay.
I mean, you guys that used the beach all the time, it was good, right? In the beginning, at least, the beach, the sand, it was better.
Yeah, but by no means is it a perfect solution to move that sand, because that sand has other stuff in it. However, once again, with DEC taking such a hard line on no new sand below the mean high water line, it's kind of hard to get around that. The only other way you could potentially get around that is you could place sand above the high water line and let some of that sand slowly come in. One thing I will say about that is that while that is technically legal, if the DEC ever came to inspect and saw a bunch of unconsolidated sand above the mean or high water line, they may not love that, despite, so it's a question of what is in their purview versus what may not be. So that is another potential option.
It sounds like you have a good option.
AJ, I got a quick question.
Yeah.
What is the deepest part of the lake? Because years ago, 1988, when I moved in here, we had about an 18-foot depth over by the dam.
Yeah.
I've noticed a lot of silt from all the streams that we have rushing in,
Yeah.
bringing in dirt for 36 years now.
Yeah.
Can't we reclaim any of that?
So the deepest part of the entire lake is basically, 150 feet right off the dam, maybe over to the right side a little bit, and it's still close to about 18 feet.
Okay,
It's about
okay.
17 and a half. It depends on, your water level fluctuates a little bit, so it always depends on that. When it starts to get really, really deep into the lake, it gets mixed in with muck, and that's material you're probably not going to be able to reclaim. Material that is just being able to, kind of slid down and is in the direct proximity, that stuff you can reclaim, because it's still mostly sand as well. So once again, unfortunately, once it gets a little bit deeper into the lake, it's kind of just gone.
We read over 18 feet in our depth finder this year, just like 18 feet 2 inches or something in that spot he's talking about.
Yeah.
So it's still deep out there.
Okay.
Yeah, and partially it's because the watershed is so forested, and when you have a forested watershed, you don't have as much sediment coming in. You do have some, but it's not like a lake that's in an urbanized area where every time there's a storm, it's no matter what storm, it's like a chocolate milk fountain. Also, too, a lot of the sediment that's coming in from a lot of these streams. So most of the streams on Roaring Brook are either in the center of the lake or on the northern half. And these particles that are coming in, they settle out very quickly because they're very heavy. And that's part of the reason why all that sand at Park Beach is on the North Peninsula, and it's not like distributed all throughout the lake. Those sand particles, they just physically cannot move as far. If this was an ocean system, this may be a little bit different, but on a smaller lake that can't generate the level of what we call fetch and the level of wave action, all that sand is going to stop there. So you probably would see the biggest impacts of what you're talking about in the northern basin, in the areas where the inlets are directly coming into the lake, and that's kind of where you would see that stuff happen. So if we have no other questions about Park Beach, I'll move on to the lake itself. So water quality this year has been great. It's been very similar to what we've had in past years, which is great. We have relatively good dissolved oxygen conditions. We have good clarity, relatively low algae growth, which is a great sign. And it's continuing. It seems to be supporting all uses. I don't think we've had any closures for HABs this year. Or maybe a slow one. Okay, yeah. So, which is to be expected. So that's great. That's great. So the water quality generally seems to be very similar to what it's been in past years. I haven't gotten all the data back, so I'd have to, wait until I can get all that back to make a full conclusion on it. But obviously the biggest thing that's changed on Roaring Brook Lake is the increase in aquatic vegetation. So back in 2011 and before, when the grass carp were stocked, it took a few years, but then the lake was functionally devoid of all vegetation. There was some vegetation in the lake in some deeper portions and in some pockets here or there, but most of the cove areas and most of the shallow areas were completely bare. I've spent a lot of time on the lake going through all the coves, and it was basically nothing. Over the past few years, though, we were starting to see small signs of the plants increasing in their population. Both in the cove areas, we would see, I know I would launch at Spur Beach to do my monitoring, and I would start to see one of the pond weeds start to wash up onto the shoreline in the past few years, which we haven't seen before. So it's like small things here or there. So we ended up deciding to do a survey to document the actual increase in vegetation. And almost every cove has vegetation in there, and the lake has vegetation basically from 0 feet all the way down to 10, 11 feet, sometimes even 12 feet. Past 12 feet, we still don't have a ton there, which is not to be unexpected. But there's a lot of vegetation everywhere. Now, some of this vegetation is good and some of this vegetation is bad. For a lake, it is not a universal good or bad thing to have aquatic plants. If you want to talk about the fishery end of it, before, when there was no vegetation in the lake, most of the largemouth bass, as every fisherman here knows, was about anywhere from 11 to 12 inches. When we did our fish shocking back in 2020, I believe, we caught 400 bass and only one fish was over 11 inches. And that fish was basically emaciated. It had a massive head and it was really, really skinny and it didn't have enough food. So what's happening is there's not enough small forage fish to be able to feed all those bass. So they end up overcrowding themselves. Right? Now you have a situation where you have a bunch of vegetation which is creating habitat and nursery habitat for these smaller fish, which presumably is translating to more bait fish, more food, and these bass that are out there are having more food to be able to grow. So that's why I think multiple fishermen have told me already that this year, these past few years have been some of the better years for fishing in terms of the size of the fish, right? That is one potential benefit of having increased vegetation. However, there's also negatives. The entire north basin of the lake is chock full of Eurasian water milfoil, which makes it extremely hard to swim in and recreate in. as well. I can just tell you with my electric motor going there, just even doing the survey, it's a lot more difficult to be able to move around there. And that's not good either. You know, these aquatic plants, when they grow and die, they do add nutrients to the lake. They will increase the level of sedimentation in a lake, and over a long period of time, you know, kind of shallow the lake a little bit faster versus having sort of nothing in that body. They also are not great for fisheries if they get too dense, right? So in the cove areas where you're starting to have some vegetation come here, but you still have open pockets of water, that's a good thing. But especially with invasive vegetation, it never stays like that. It always is going to a point of being this 100% topped out, you know, dense thickness. And then with the fishery, you get the opposite problem, where the large fish can't actually forage inside of those small beds, and the large fish start to starve themselves because they can't access it. And then you have sort of an inverse of the situation. You have a few small bass that are, or a few amount of bass that get really, really large, because those are the only ones that can get the food resources, and then you have a ton of really small bluegill. So the point of me saying all this is that the vegetation increase is not necessarily automatically a good thing or a bad thing. It really depends on the uses of the lake and what the group wants to see moving forward. So one of the big conversations we're going to have over these next few months is, what do we want to do about the vegetation, especially the invasive vegetation. Most of the vegetation in the lake currently that is causing a problem is the invasive vegetation that's not from New York, it's not from this area. They're an invasive species that was introduced into the area from the aquarium trade, or, you know, mostly the aquarium trade. So really, you know, I've done a lot of these management projects with aquatic vegetation. It's probably the thing I do the most, probably more than water quality. So we've dealt with this on a ton of different lakes. There's different strategies to be able to deal with this. But the important thing for your community to consider is, what is an acceptable level of vegetation in the lake? Is it this intermediate level where, you know, we have some vegetation that's able to support fisheries, but it's not getting to the point where it's interfering with all the rest of our uses? Is it somewhere on one spectrum? Is it, you know, oh, you know, we loved how the lake was in 2016, 17, 18, 19, you know, with no vegetation, why don't we just go back to that? Or the opposite perspective of, well, you know, our fishery was really not in a great place. We really want to make sure we enhance the vegetation in the lake to keep it there. So my job is to sort of guide you through those, give you the pros and cons of what those scenarios mean, and also too, what techniques are available to control the vegetation if you would like that, right? We're talking about herbicides, potentially another grass carp stocking, mechanical harvesting, altering the drawdown. All these techniques have potential to achieve a particular goal, but it's almost meaningless unless the community comes up with some unified perspective on how they want to see the lake and how they want to see the vegetation, because the vegetation is not going away. So if you do the do nothing option, it's probably just going to keep increasing to a point where it's probably going to be detrimental, I would imagine. The lake is shallow enough, it can support vegetation growth throughout like 80% of the total surface area. So that's kind of what I'll leave you with.
Is there a hybrid model that has a little bit of all those things you talked about? Drawdowns, herbicides,
Yeah.
Mechanical and carp? Is there like some?
Yeah,
some magic
most
wand?
lakes are successful when they do multiple techniques, because each technique has. We don't have great techniques in general, right? And when I say great, is that we don't have a technique that can handle everything. That can be, you know, the gold standard for an aquatic plant management technique is that's effective, selective, and has very minimal non-target impact, and also is relatively cost sensitive. We just don't have that. You know, if you take grass carp, for example, grass carp can be highly effective, but you can't keep them in one place. They go everywhere, and your lake is seeing the impacts of that, right? However, they're very cheap. It's like $25 a fish, and you stocked 500 fish, and you had a decade of vegetation control with, you know, whatever investment that was, you know, plus getting the truck here, right? But it's a sledgehammer when you probably need a mount. You know, when you go to herbicides can be very selective. They can also be very cost effective. However, you have the big issue with herbicides in terms of permitting, and you also have an issue in terms of public perception. You know, herbicides are a very difficult topic to talk about. There's a lot of good information about herbicides, but there's a lot of really bad information about herbicides. So there's a really important social dynamic when it comes to that your group needs to be ready to, if that's the path you want to take, is to be ready to sort of deal with that and ready to talk about those things. Diver harvesting. You can bring divers in to pull plants out. It's a great selective technique. You can target the invasives without touching the natives. It is extremely inefficient. you know, the general costs for diver harvesting is anywhere from like $2,500 to $3,000 a day, and they can only really get done, you know, an acre in maybe 5 days or 6. So costs for diver harvesting, while it's very selective, the costs are really, really high, right? So there's more pros and cons to all these different techniques. You know, drawdown, there's ones that are pros and cons, but there are hybrid models. So some lakes have done shallow drawdowns and then stocked grass carp at a low level to be able to control vegetation that way. That is one option for a lake in general. Some have done herbicides and drawdown. Some have done herbicides to kind of knock out a large area and then stock a low amount of grass carp behind to sort of knock, you know, to kind of keep those plants in check. So there are ways to integrate the technique so you're not sort of, you know, moving too far in one direction. But once again, it really depends on the goals. You know, we can't really have a good conversation about what techniques make sense if we don't come up with clear goals as to what should be expected. When I talk about goals, I'm talking about vegetation coverage. Do we want 20% of the lake to be covered in vegetation? Do we want 50%? Do we want sort of a hybrid goal? I work with a lake, Lake Kitchewan, out in Pound Ridge, and the goal that they came up with is they wanted the lake to have 40 to 70% of vegetation in the lake, but of that 40 to 70%, there's only like 20% that can grow all the way to the surface. And we did that because that lake is really, really shallow. And if you wiped out a ton of the vegetation, they would start to have massively negative water quality impacts. So we wanted to keep some vegetation, but also keep in mind that we know if the vegetation gets all the way to the surface, that's the problem. If the vegetation stayed on the bottom, it would be that would be the perfect scenario.
So AJ, I think our goal would be we'd like to be able to swim in the lake without getting our feet and legs hitting weeds, but
Yeah.
also have 5-pound bass.
And no cost. And no
cost.
Well,
Yeah.
A little cost is fine, but we'll put
Yeah.
Mike on that. He's good at getting the rates down.
Yeah. No, that's a perfectly reasonable goal. It is. You know, the 5-pound bass one, there's a little bit more to that than just the vegetation, right? But no, it is reasonable to basically have a lake that is not impacted, you know, by that topped out vegetation.
Right.
But the goal would be is, you know, so for example, if we took that as one of the goals, what we want to do is we want to look at the areas of the lake and determine which areas are more prone to being a recreational impediment versus another, right? So the north end of the lake.
So with the north
Yeah.
end of the lake, then you mentioned you could do spot treatments, right?
You could, yeah.
So going back to Bob's point, you know, a hybrid, lower the lake down 4 feet like we usually do. That addresses all the coves, and then spot treatment maybe on the north end, where you know a drawdown 4 foot's not going to expose the weeds. Something like that.
That's possible. The thing you have to consider though is the drawdown, the way it's worked in past years, you can't decouple that from the carp, right? So you've had carp and drawdown for many, many years. So that bare, clear area you've had in all those coves can't be 100% attributed to the drawdown. I know that because we have plenty of other lakes that just do drawdown and they still get aquatic plants growing in those areas because those plants, they don't die off the same way as other plants do. So some plants reproduce primarily by seed, and like a naiad. It's a small plant, you've probably never even seen it. It covers like the bottom of most lakes, but because it reproduces by seed, drawdowns don't affect it as much, right? So in a lot of other lakes, we see naiads grow, you know, they kind of take off when lakes do drawdowns because everything else gets knocked out. So now that your grass carp numbers are a lot lower than they were, what's going to happen in these cove areas? I mean, the fact that we're seeing vegetation in the coves tells me not only that the grass carp have decreased, but the drawdown itself is not enough to control everything we're seeing in the cove areas. If that was the truth, we wouldn't have any growth in the cove where you live, Tommy, in Park Beach, or the cove in the back here. But that's not the case.
Yeah.
So it's a little more complicated than just that.
Right. I mean, the weeds now really are just happening at the end of the summer. It's not starting in June. In the past, if you didn't do a successful drawdown, you'd get weeds in July.
Yeah.
And it would be horrible all summer.
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, the give and take. I mean, if the drawdown works and gives you, you know, a pretty much good weed-free cove from June, July, and the beginning of August, you know, if it just pops up at the end of August.
Yeah, and you know that's certainly a potential goal. My whole point in that is saying that the drawdown, your group is seeing the drawdown, but it's not purely the drawdown that's been controlling aquatic plants. You know, the most time we've seen grass carp are in those shallow areas as well. So how do you decouple the impacts of both of those? They're kind of all muddled.
Okay, when you have the drawdown, the weeds die in the coves. will we also get that sediment because of the dead vegetation that we had when we had the lake so low many years ago for some construction project? The lake was very low, didn't fill it up on time. We had a lot of weeds, they all died off, and the next thing you know, we have all this scum on the top of the rocks that we never had before. If we have a drawdown without the carp, will that happen? Because all the dead
Yeah,
vegetation.
you're going to get more vegetation decaying there for sure.
Yeah, so we'll have a lot
I don't know how much it's going to be, and the other thing to think about is that if you continuously draw down, part of what Tommy's saying is correct in terms of fact you're probably not going to have as much vegetation in there as you would if you didn't do anything. So if you left it for 4 years and then drew it down, you have all that biomass that's been accumulating and then drawing down. It's a little bit different, but
That makes
you're generally correct. Yeah, there would be some of that.
And then I swim, so like a few people here, there's a lot of weeds that are topping.
Yeah.
Will a drawdown affect all the topping weeds down by Moon Beach, or even I see the weeds down by Cardiac, and you see them
By-
by Park Beach?
By itself, the drawdown is going to be marginally effective, and this is why. The drawdown can only affect the areas that are actually exposed, right? So most of so if you take the north end and even outside of Moon Beach, that depth of water is like 5 to 6 feet. The drawdown is not going to touch that vegetation.
Well,
So
it could make it worse.
potentially, I would probably it could, but I would probably say it would be mostly neutral. It would mostly be a neutral impact, right? And the thing with drawdown too is that, as you know, you've all lived here for many years, when you draw the lake down, it doesn't just go down, right? It slowly goes down and it slowly comes up. That deep section, right? So if you draw down 4 feet, that 3 to 4 foot section is the last place to be dewatered and the first place to have water in the spring. So plants oftentimes are not really well controlled in that deepest section of the drawdown. So that's the limitations of it. So you could, but probably, honestly, I don't think a drawdown, unless you're planning on doing like a 9-foot drawdown, which I don't know if I would advise. That would be a lot of other,
Too many weeds.
there'd be a lot of other issues with that. The North Basin especially is not going to be affected by a drawdown in terms of the middle of it on its own.
So you mentioned lakes that have limited carp. Would we be better off doing 100 carp instead of 1,000, or some combination of drawdown and a few carp? Not a lot. I mean, so we can have fishing and swimming.
Yeah, so some lakes have tried that. Some lakes have been successful at that. The problem is carp stocking is like a big black box, right? So the concept is, you're exactly right. If you stock a low amount of carp, it should have less of an impact. The problem is that you don't really know where that impact is happening. So Oscawana is a great example of this. So recently, Oscawana basically has no vegetation left in the lake. And part of it was because of the grass carp stocking. But what happened is that they tried to do a very conservative approach, where they stocked only a few fish, and then they would wait and see the impacts. The vegetation that was impacting people swimming, right? The Eurasian water milfoil, which is in Roaring Brook, and another plant, their population wasn't declining; it was staying the same. So a lot of the community was, rightfully like, "Oh, what are we doing here? Like, the grass carp aren't working." When we would do our surveys, we would look at all the different species, and we saw this one species called Robbins pondweed, which is an amazing plant because it never gets to the surface. It's never a problem. It forms this thick blanket on the bottom. It's great for fish. It's like if you were to create a plant in a lab that you wanted in a lake, it would be this one. That plant's population would slowly decline every single year. So the people didn't see an issue, but that plant was declining, and it was being replaced by an algae that's not great for the lake.
So the carp were eating the good weeds, but not the bad ones.
Yeah, they were eating the good ones, and the community didn't know that it was happening outside of our survey actually finding it, right? It was, if you looked at the lake, everything would be the same. So the conclusion from a lot of people in the community, and rightfully so, was, well, we're not seeing an impact. The carp aren't working. In reality, they were working. They were just feeding on something that we really didn't want them to be feeding on. So then that's the problem with an intermediate stocking approach, is that you can't control what they're going to eat and when they're going to eat it.
So I think Tommy pretty well, Bob, everybody summed it up pretty well. What we all want is swimming and fishing. We're going to probably look to you for some recommendations on that.
Yeah.
I just have a question. You talked about percentages. What percentage are we at now? Because I agree with Tom, it wasn't bad until mid-August, and even so, it
Yeah.
was horrible.
I would say, I have the data to calculate. I haven't calculated it yet, because we do a sonar mapping and we can actually calculate the percentage in the lake. My guess is you're probably at 60%. But the important caveat is the storm event that happened in 2023 that pushed all the carp over. That to me was probably, maybe not the flashpoint, but a big event that started to flip the lake to being more vegetatively dominant. Because you still had a bunch of carp that died off there, and also a bunch of the fish that went in the lake. I guarantee you, not all of them survived. You know, just because you see a lake, see a fish swim off, doesn't mean that it didn't die and just float to or sink to the bottom. So, Roaring Brook to me is in sort of a transition period. You're starting to gain your vegetation back, but just because you didn't see bad impacts in August and September, or I'm sorry, it didn't come on until that particular time, doesn't mean that's how it's going to be. To me, your lake's in the process of the vegetation recovering. You're not at the peak of where that vegetation could be. So I understand what you're saying. It's just I don't know if I'd feel comfortable to say that. All right, this is sort of the maintained goal. It's tough.
I remember when we had a lot of carp, we had summers where we couldn't use the beach because of algae, and that was
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
so you want that.
And that's a risk.
happy
No,
medium.
it is. It is. That's a risk when you go that hard with carp. That's why carp stockings are in the Northeast incredibly difficult to get right. I don't know any lake that has gotten them right over a long period of time. You may be able to get them right in a snapshot, a year or two, but the lake is not staying stagnant in that year or two. It's constantly doing that tipsy-turvy.
Can you talk a little bit about the herbicide option? Just
Sure.
Sort of like what that would look like and what the pros and cons are?
Yeah, so aquatic herbicides have been in use for 50, 60 years now, and they are approved by the EPA. And the process to approve an herbicide is not just like a 1 year, the company gets data, they send it to EPA, and EPA approves it. It's like a decade-long process, and it takes independent data into account. So I'm confident to say that most herbicides, in terms of what we know about them now, if they're used correctly, they are safe for swimming, fishing, boating, all that sort of stuff. Part of the reason is I used to work in a lab that independently tested herbicides, so I kind of saw it from that other aspect. But in terms of the actual impact, so herbicides are classified into two sort of categories. You have contact herbicides, which you spray it on a plant and that plant dies off because the tissue dies off. It doesn't move anywhere, it's just kind of sprayed on the plant. Then you have a systemic herbicide, which gets uptaked by the plant and interferes with some sort of biochemical pathway. They can be things called oxymimics, where they trick the plant into growing outside of its stores. They can be, they can interfere with chlorophyll production. They can interfere with transport of minerals across the cell. It's just a whole bunch of different things. The reason I bring that up is because systemic herbicides are usually more selective. And that to me is one of the biggest advantages of using an herbicide. Most of the other techniques we have outside of the harvesting are not selective. Grass carp are not selective. Drawdown are not selective. Herbicides actually can be selective. One of the herbicides that's recently out that's been very successful on Eurasian water milfoil is Priscillachlor, which in the Northeast really just targets the Eurasian water milfoil. They use a really, really small amount of it. And that's why it's able to just target that, and native plants seem to flourish after. We've monitored a bunch of lakes that have done this. The Sedgwick Club over in China did this to great success. There's plenty of other lakes that have done it. The problem that Roaring Brook Lake specifically is going to face is Eurasian water milfoil is not the only invasive plant in the lake. There's another one, fanwort, which is more difficult to control than Eurasian water milfoil because there's no selective herbicide option for it, unfortunately. For some reason, it's the black sheep. It doesn't impact it. So the only way that in my other lakes we've been able to control fanwort is to either be very selective in terms of the area. So we'd have to use a contact herbicide that kills everything else off, but we would have to control it and put it like exactly on that particular point. I work with a lake in Connecticut that has a fanwort and a state-listed rare species like directly next to each other. And the only way that we protect that rare species is we tell the applicator to inject it directly on top of it. And once again, the problem is that the fanwort it's just so resistant to everything else. So the problem we don't want to create in Roaring Brook is we don't want to control all the Eurasian water milfoil and then create an issue where the fanwort just says, oh wow, look at all this open area, let's potentially come back. The hope is that you can control the Eurasian water milfoil and then some of the natives can come back, kind of keep that area, keep the North Basin sort of intact without allowing that fanwort to grow back. When we do aquatic plant management, we don't want to create another issue by solving one. So I know that's a lot, but that's kind of where we're at with Roaring Brook in that.
Because right now the whole North Bay is basically filled with plants, is that a bad sign for next year that it's going to spread further in the lake and a lot more will be clogged with weeds?
I would anticipate you're probably going to have more weeds next year unless there's some different climactic, but I wouldn't say it's because of the North Basin. Once again, it's because you're in this recovery period, right? Where now you still have carp, but the carp numbers are dying off. So you're going to increase in your weeds, but I don't think it's going to be because of the North Basin per se.
But in other words, if we don't deal with this within the next year or whatever, by next spring to decide what to do, that means it's potentially going to be a lot worse next
It
summer.
potentially could be, yeah, because there's a lot of areas, especially on the southern end of the lake, that have milfoil, but it's not at a really, really high density yet. Even outside of Moon Beach, that whole area right there, there's a lot of vegetation there, but it's not nearly as bad as it could be. And what we're talking about as bad as it could be is when the milfoil gets all the way to the surface, it starts to spread on the surface horizontally. That's how it starts to grow. And then you create these mats of vegetation. So if you remember the bladderwort that came up in 2016, was it? That is a potential scenario for the entire lake. You know, we don't know if that'll exactly happen, but
So we need to come
that's
up
the
with
fear.
a solution within
Yeah.
the reasonable near future.
That's the fear.
What is topping up then?
That's the Eurasian water milfoil. That is the invasive.
That's topping. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of lily pads.
Yes,
I
there's
saw
been a little bit
few,
more,
and
yeah.
now I see more and more, like a little one. I go back out, and there might be 30 or 40 in that one spot.
Yeah.
I'm afraid to touch them because I don't know what to do. I was pulling them up, but I would like to know what can get them because they can really take over.
So
and what I can do. or
in
anybody can do.
Roaring Brook Lake itself, with the drawdown, I honestly would not be concerned about lilies taking over. One, because if the drawdown keeps happening at the same depth, it's going to stop those. It's going to really stop those lilies from colonizing the areas from 0 to 3 feet because those rhizomes can't resist being, frozen year and year and year,
But
year
they're
over
pretty
year. over
deep
year.
in the lake.
Oh yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. So in the deeper sections, they just don't get that abundant in most lakes. They're growing now, but lakes, you rarely see lakes that are like at the 5-6 foot of depth and have dense lily coverage. If it ever gets to that point, you can deal with it. And there's ways to deal with it. You can harvest it. You can use an herbicide. Grass carp are not a great option for lilies. You can even cut them. I have some lakes that just.
But if we go out, like in our tryouts, what can we do?
You could pull them up.
Pull them up?
You could, yeah.
And we're not going to get the roots. We're not going to get the rhizomes.
Yeah, if you were able to get in the water and actually pull them up, it could work. But once again, I wouldn't. The lilies is not, I guess, what I would be too concerned about. One, it's a native, and two, once again, unless something changes, let's say if you guys didn't do a drawdown, and that area became more, it had more organic material continuing to come back in because the plants are growing and dying. All right, then yeah, maybe lilies could be a particular issue in some areas. But the fact that you're doing the drawdown each year is probably helping to stop that. And once again, deep water, they don't get to the same level. Like Tibbet Lake over here, all the area where the lilies are very abundant, that's 3 feet of water or 2 feet of water. The southern end of the lake stays relatively clear, partially because it's a little bit deeper. Lilies have kind of like a maximum growth of about 6 feet. And then after that, it's really rare to see them. And even when they get up to that 6, it's tough.
What's the deepest depth of Tibbet?
6-7 feet.
That makes a big difference.
Yeah, it's a different system.
Right.
It
That's why it looks like that,
yeah,
right?
it 100% is. Yeah. Well, the thing with Tibbet and a lot of lakes in this area is that people just dammed lakes where they probably shouldn't be lakes, right? So Tibbet's got a lot of bedrock under it. So when they made the lake, whenever they made it, it was never dredged to the depth that it probably needed to be when it was first made. And that's the problem when you get a lot of lakes that are formed and people don't really have the forethought to think, what are we forming here?
So, for decades, we relied solely on drawdowns. Decades.
Yeah.
What's changed? I don't understand what's changed because religiously, every 4 years, every election year, we drop the lake 7 feet.
So if I'm remembering correctly, you haven't dropped the lake 7 feet religiously every 4 years.
That's correct. Johnny's absolutely right. Matter of fact, I was going to say the same thing. We used to do every 4 years, we'd have the option to drop it 7 feet.
Yeah.
We used to do that almost religiously back in the 70s and 80s, and then we kind of stopped doing it. Would it
Yeah.
would it help if we went either back to that, or if we set up some kind of a new process where you do 4 feet, 5 feet, 6 feet, 7 feet, and then back to 4 feet, 5 feet, 6 feet, 7 feet? Would that
Yeah,
make a
so
difference?
I would be careful with dropping the lake that far that much because you're really impacting a lot of the other organisms there. I mean, 7 feet gets to be pretty drastic every single year. To your
Well,
second,
not every year. I'm saying.
Oh,
it used to
oh,
be-
yeah,
used to
but,
be
but
every
I'm saying
4
your
years.
first scenario of it being every 7,
4
but
years.
the second scenario of it being 4, 5, 6, 7. There's plenty of lakes that do shallow and deep alternate drawdowns. Candlewood Lake does that all the time.
Yeah.
They do a drawdown between 7 feet and 10 feet, and they do I think they do 7, 7, 10, and then 7, 7, 10. And for their particular situation, it works.
Okay.
It doesn't solve everything. The problem is, once again, when you get to that really, really deep drawdown level, you start to impact a lot more organisms, and then you start to really impact your natives as well, right? You want to try and keep your native species in the lake, ideally, because those are the ones providing your fish production and all that other stuff. So that would be the only thing I'm a little bit nervous about with doing a consistent 7. But there are
No, I'm
lakes
not
that,
saying consistency.
yeah,
I'm saying every 4 years do the
Yeah,
same,
just like
Yeah.
we were doing.
like what we used to do.
that's a potential option. We'd have to see about that, and see what would make sense. Also, too, we have to see if the DEC would be fine with that.
See if
That's
what?
another. With the DEC would be fine with that. One thing you got to remember is just because DEC allowed it 20 years ago doesn't mean it's going to be allowed today. With
Okay, but-
with that level of drawdown. So it's just all things to consider. I'm not saying it's a bad thing or good thing. It's just questions to
Because this year we're scheduled for a 4-foot drop,
yeah,
which is normal, what we usually do.
yeah.
But like we said, usually it would be, if you did history, during history we used to have, this would be an option for a 7-year drop. 7-foot drop, which will probably be next year when they do the dam anyway.
Yeah, no, that is true. It probably will be.
I know you mentioned we're at like a 60% vegetation level now. Is there a tipping point where, say, the last 3 years we went up 10% a year? Is there a tipping point that the lake will get to where you're going to see 30% increase in 1 year?
It's a good question. It's hard to predict how it's going to increase each year. I would say less than a tipping point, but if you start to get to 80% coverage, and more importantly, if the entire North Basin is completely unswimmable, and you start to have the area by Moon Beach be completely unswimmable and some of the other areas, that to me is the big concern. So I can't answer the question of what the exact tipping point will be, but what's happening in the lake is that the carp are slowly dying off. It's a very slow process, but they're slowly dying off. So there's going to be some point where your vegetation starts to come back up, and this was the year. So will it go like this? Will it go like this? It is kind of hard to tell, but we do know it's going to increase. That is 100% going to happen.
So you never answered my question about what's changed.
What's changed?
What's changed?
So I don't have good data from back when before the carp and there is no data from back before the carp and when the drawdown was happening. So I really can't answer that question because what I'm seeing now is vegetation increasing
the
after.
carp is relatively new from where I sit.
Yeah.
We only had one placement of carp that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
And they've been here 13 years. Yeah, and then we were
But so
told
you're-
it would be only 8 years.
But your question is asking me what do I think has changed, and
Right.
without the data well before then, I can only speculate. Now, I would imagine that if you stocked 500, and now, once again, I wasn't around for these conversations, but if you stocked 500 carp in the lake at one time, I would imagine that the drawdown was not sufficient to deal with your plant issues. Because then why would you have stocked the carp? I don't know this, but this is kind of.
The decision was made on that basis, yes.
Sorry, can you say?
The decision was made on that basis. It was the growth of the weeds and so on in the lake and the inability to swim. This was more the, it hit more the middle of the summer,
Yeah.
incapacitated the use of the lake for a good part of the summer. And this was in 2007, 8, 9, 10, 11, so we're 10 years, 13 years into these parts, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean that's kind of what I'm getting at is, to me, the drawdown has never been fully effective. It's been a good tool to help reduce the impacts, but no lake, unless you draw down 15 feet each year, is going to be able to clear out. Like think about Boyd Corners Reservoir when you drive up on 301. I mean, they draw that down, what, 35 feet, something, 40 feet, and that's the situation. All right, they don't really have any vegetation there, but here, to me, that's, you know, I guess to answer your question about what's changed, I think it's, you know, we don't have any carp anymore, so they're not having that
Right.
impact.
What's changed from the every 4-year drawdowns to current day?
So what's changed from every?
What's changed from the regular drawdowns, decades that we've been doing that, every 4 years, to now having introduced carp, you're talking about chemicals, you're talking about a lot of other options. But I'm trying to understand, I'm trying to get my hands around what's actually changed from 30, 40 years ago. And you said you don't have the data.
Was there any milfoil here 30 years ago?
Yeah, ecological succession, right?
Yeah, I believe. Yeah,
changed.
I believe it's. Yeah, there has been milfoil. I mean, the lake has probably gotten somewhat shallower. It's probably not a much, but it's probably gotten somewhat shallower. You know, 30, 40 years ago, you're probably talking about some impacts from climate change as well over that time period. Subtle impacts, but impacts in general.
Increase in the buildings, number of buildings around there.
Yeah. You know, the transition from seasonal to cottages, but that also happened. That didn't just happen now. I mean, that was, you know, that happened when I was born in 1990 and stuff like that. So it's a tough question to answer, to be completely honest. I just know that it just makes sense that the drawdown itself just wasn't sufficient enough, and now we're having a scenario where if nothing happens, the drawdown will come back to be the only thing stopping the plants from taking over again.
If we assess what decisions were based on the levels of low in 2009, when I got around to making the decision, with the circumstances today, can we assess the two and then determine what the best process is to carry on? I mean, maybe we can leave it alone for a while, except we've got some serious growth situations in certain parts of the lake, so we can't leave it alone. But I'm just wondering how we can compare, because the Department of Environmental Conservation was thick in the process of designing the solution that we went with.
Yeah.
And they recommended the 500 fish, and that was at the bottom of the list of numbers they were willing to recommend.
Yeah.
And seeing what's happened with that, is there any way we can use that knowledge to make a decision at this time? And I know Lake Oscawana did carp, but they kind of tried to make it resident in just a part of their lake. They were going to experiment with carp in one part of their lake. That, of course, as you can well imagine, as you're thinking about it, didn't work.
Yeah.
So the carp move around, and so that Oscawana examples are not particularly relevant to our situation. I just don't know how we use what we learned and make it work better the next time around.
To be honest, you know, I would have to really get a good handle on, and I really haven't in the past years, is get a handle of what the conditions were pre-2011.
We have that documented. The Department of Environmental Conservation has it. We worked with them for years.
However, so when I first came on, I did a literature search of all the literature that was out on the lake. Before me, you had Princeton Hydro, right? They did a survey in 2016, but that was in the middle of the grass carp stocking. Before 2016, the only survey data available, right? And I use survey data because that tells us how much vegetation was in the lake and what types of vegetation in the lake. Was done by Robert Cortman in the 1980s. 1990.
So that's 43 years ago.
Yeah. So there on Roaring Brook, unfortunately, there's a knowledge gap in terms of how much vegetation was actually in the lake at that time. So once again, it goes back to what you said about what changed. You know, if the drawdown, you know, I don't know how the conditions back then compared to what they are now. I mean, you can tell me that, right? Is it worse? Is it better?
We could access from the town. I mean, we worked with the town very closely to determine what we should do, if anything. So they should have documentation, particularly since the Department of Environmental Conservation was on top of this the whole way.
I could tell you for a fact, in 2011, you could get a grass carp permit issued without a survey.
I don't know if
Yeah.
we did that.
No, but so one of the things I did too as another project is I looked at all the grass carp stockings in the entire region from 1990 to 2011.
Well, let's go back and see what we did then, and then compare
we did look at that,
Yep.
and there's no survey data available in that time frame
In the time frame around it.
that you made the decision.
207, 208, 209.
Yep.
They're not there. Okay.
And it makes sense because, once again, the state did not require a survey of the lake prior to putting the carp in. The permit application is basically you can fill it out and you can write, oh, I have 20% vegetation of this, 50% of this, and it doesn't need to be checked by a professional. It doesn't need to be vetted. DEC doesn't necessarily need to even come out and look at the lake itself. They'll look at the outlet and make sure you have that structure in place to keep the carp from leaving. But at that time, they weren't as focused on the impacts in the lake, which is
We do have some information in terms of we could go see something, right? They didn't just tell us to go do it.
they didn't tell you to go do it, but I guarantee that their process was not rigorous enough to answer the question.
Okay. So I just on for time.
Yeah.
AJ's going to do a State of the Lake
Yeah.
presentation.
Yeah.
I guess March or so.
Yeah.
So, you have questions, you can email us the questions.
Yeah, and we're gonna have more conversations about the
Yeah.
aquatic plants coming up soon too. It's not
And,
just
he'll have his full State of the Lake presentation next year, early next year. So I encourage everybody to attend. If we get this kind of attendance, that would be great. I mean, it's really something terrific. Thanks so much for
thank you.
coming up and doing this for us. Yeah, Bobby.
One comment to close on the conversation going on for the group who've been here for a long time. The lake this year is better than I have seen since 1980.
I agree.
We have an incredible lake this year, and if we can keep it this way, that should be our goal.
And
I
that's with a
think-
lot of dead carp.
Well, that I can't answer to. We used to have in our budget weeders. We had a group of young teenagers
My son was
who
one of
were
them. Yep.
there every summer, going out in rowboats, just skimming the top of the lake so we could swim and boat. That's how bad it used to be.
Yeah.
We have not had that in years. I'm not sure which of our interventions has done that, but we've done something right with a big change from before 2000.
The one last thing I'll say, because I know we got to move on, is it's great that the lake has looked good this year. I agree. I mean, outside of the North Basin having a little bit more vegetation growth, it has been there. But you cannot think about a lake as a static one-year
I fully
system.
understand that.
So the concern that any of this has to come under is not what it looks right now, but how can we keep it looking like this exact level and have it and stop it from sliding to the point where it's triple the amount of vegetation. That is really, I think, the way to think about this.
That was my point.
Yeah.
We did not have summers where we didn't have to have harvesters clearing the top of the lake so we could swim and boat.
And I would imagine we wouldn't want that in the future.
And we had it year after year. It was not cyclable.
In the interest of not hijacking the whole meeting, I'm going to close it up here, but we're going to have more conversations about this. And thank you for being so engaged. It really matters. Thank you. Yeah, this is great.
Thanks for coming. This was not part of the normal contract that we had with AJ. AJ just did this on his own. So
Thank you.
we appreciate
Not a problem.
that very much.
All right, well, everyone have a good one, okay? Great weekend.
Thank you.
All right, Ina, anything else on the lake you want to speak of?
So, I just want to make an invitation that the Fund for Roaring Brook Lake, which is our new 501c3, is sponsoring a slideshow and then a hike on October 4th and 5th. Everybody is invited. We'll get the information out to people, but you can also go to the Fund for Roaring Brook Lake or search for that, .org, I think, and become a subscriber, and then you'll get information as it comes up. What we're going to be looking at with that slideshow and the hike are some Native American stone structures that are right in our watershed, right in the area around our lake. So everybody is welcome. We hope you'll come.
Bob, you want to tell us about our garbage boats?
Garbage boats, yeah. So, hello everyone. I hope everyone's having a beautiful morning. It's great out here, and just a reminder that we're also very lucky to be able to participate in something like this, so we can have something like this be the way we want it to be. So, I want to give a big shout out to AJ. AJ's awesome. What a cool guy to come out here and help us out. Yes, thank you so much. so much. I'd like to start with a funny story. I was talking to one of my buddies the other day about some of the things that we're going through with the weeds and with the boats and with everything else. And he said to me, he said, Bob, seems like an awful lot of work. Maybe you should just get out of politics and go back to being an outlaw altogether. I laughed and chuckled to myself and I said, well, I sort of got into local politics so I could fine tune my outlaw game, Yeah. So, my wife told me not to tell that joke, but I told it anyway. We at the beginning of the season, we recognized that there was a major issue with abandoned boats. We put together a plan and a structure, and we set out to do it. We were able to identify 17 boats across our public beaches that were what we consider clearly abandoned. They didn't float, they weren't boats, and we marked them. You can see one of them right over there with that orange X. We've marked them. We made a spreadsheet for them. Ina and I took the trip together. We identified all this stuff. We sent it to the town, and we're working on getting them to procure the transportation services for these gems to get out of here. So it's a really great thing. It's surprising that it sort of took this long to happen. I know out in front of Moon Beach, these boats were out there for a long time, just sitting there, and it sort of proves that the Roaring Brook Lake Property Owners Association, when the members are active and actively trying to do something, that really can come together and have it done and convince the town that it needs to be, it needs to happen. So it's great seeing everybody out here today. I think this is a record turnout from what I remember, and I think it shows a commitment in the community in general about how we think that this organization might be able to come together differently than we have in the past, have a greater number of people, and have more of an impact to get things the way we want them. We have a bunch of issues coming up with Eurasian milfoil. I won't go on. We have issues with our docks are going to need major repair and modifications pretty soon. We have issues with new, fancy, awesome pontoon boats on the lake that seem to be occupying some of the docks and stuff. And we want to talk about ways to be able to allow people to continue to enjoy the recreation, but also provide dignified places for people to be able to keep boats both on and off the water. If you go down to Park Beach, you can see that these boats are just strewn across the dock, and it's basically because there's not a dignified place to keep them there. So I want to continue the conversation, moving forward throughout the winter and into next year about how we can better accommodate boats that that need a place to live but don't need to live on the docks necessarily. So I think that's one of the things that we're going to be doing, along with phase 2 of the boat removal, which is not just garbage boats, but boats that aren't garbage that may also be abandoned. So I think that next year we're going to sort of develop a similar plan to this year to be able to identify boats that are abandoned but aren't garbage and figure out a way to do something, whether we remove them, whether we ownership them. I don't really know what to do yet. We're going to sort of talk about it, but I think that it's sort of phase 2 of the plan. The boat thing's still going to be an issue. I'm guessing that there are at least 4 or 5 boats on that rack right now that don't belong to anybody that live here anymore. So that'll be phase 2. Yes, Joe.
I like what you're saying. I'm really glad you're here talking. Can you open meetings where we can get together and discuss it or talk to you about it?
We're here. We're doing it.
More than here.
Oh.
More than on a Saturday morning during the summer. Maybe you said we're going to think about it over the winter. Maybe we could get some people that are really interested.
Sure.
And that use the beaches and use the boats and use the pontoon boats.
Sure.
And so we can all talk. And
Absolutely.
listen to
Absolutely. I think that's a good idea.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what? So it's funny. I don't know if everybody knows, but there's actually a wildly underutilized piece of Roaring Brook Lake property. It's called Shore Lane. It's on the other side of the lake. It's between Cardiac and Park Beach, and it's really just a single lane, tiny little, entrance to the lake. There's no beach. The grade is actually not acceptable right now. It's like there's like a 2 or 3 foot drop off into the water. But the parking is actually really adequate, and I think that maybe one of the plans we would talk about at least is
Their boats are over there, though. Right? Are there boats?
there are boats over there. They're just sort of strewn over the side or whatever. And they're actually partially blocking the access, but whatever. We'll talk about that. I think that maybe we can repurpose this piece of property because it's basically unusable for swimming. There's no beach there. It's basically just a boat launch, and there's ample parking. Maybe we add an additional dock there to be able to store some more of these boats, or maybe even the RBLPOA in general sponsors the purchase of these and includes a membership to them that would be exclusive to RBLPOA members only, meaning you'd have to be a member, an active member, to be able to utilize these things. I think we could greatly increase our involvement in the community. I think we need to get our numbers up anyway. If you look at the demographics of the RBLPOA, we need to begin restocking the ranks, or in the next 20 or 30 years there'll be nobody left. So I think that maybe we can incentivize people to become more active. I mean, this is a great turnout today, which is awesome. But we need to be able to, like, you know, we need to be able to have more people involved and continue this great tradition of what we have, so we can support our beautiful community that we all love and use so much. And really, you know, that's basically it. So anybody have questions for me?
Great ideas.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
What was the funny thing you said you were going to say?
Oh, sorry. I also am developing a comprehensive solution to a lot of our transportation problems in the community. You know, we have this speed limit thing that we've been working on also, and then there is limited parking for the beaches. The beaches are, you know, people love going to the beaches, and there's sort of some limited parking going on, and it's a comprehensive solution. It's just 2 words. We'll talk about it next year. Golf carts. Golf carts, yes. The golf carts are eco-friendly. They're tiny. They're quiet. They're slow.
That's what they do.
You can put 4 golf carts where you can put 1 car.
My brother's in South Carolina. Everybody's got a golf cart.
In Pulaski, New York, you can drive a golf cart.
They
right
drive
down
them
the
to
road.
Walmart. They go all over the
county
place
in
with
New
them.
York. I love golf carts. Everyone loves golf carts.
They don't have cardiac hill.
And while we're on the beach committee topic, I'd be remiss if we don't mention Brian Mansfield, who did a awesome job on all of the beaches this year. And you know, we really appreciate all the work that he did. It's not a very high-paying job. It's almost like volunteer work for the amount of hours that he puts in to do it. But Brian, we really appreciate that. Anything?
Thanks, Bob.
Anything you want to let us know? Like don't throw dog poop in the garbage cans and stuff like that, or yeah, we've been having issues with people using the trash bins for their pet excrement while when they walk their dogs. I've heard not only our beach bins, but regular residents' bins as well. They see it sitting there and they just throw it right in there, and then it sits for a week and it smells like crap, you know. So yeah, how about just bring it home and just bring it home with you, throw it in your own trash bin and deal with it that way. You know, obviously we appreciate that people are cleaning up after themselves, but you know, it goes back to, I'm sorry?
Spur people
Haven't been what?
cleaning up after.
Oh, so they're just leaving it there, right? So it just goes back to what I mentioned.
Photographing and publicly shaming people who let their pets defecate on the beaches and don't do anything about it.
Yeah.
I'm just joking.
So, but I mean, I say this every meeting pretty much, but we need to be neighborly. You know, we all live around this beach. We all want it to be nice and beautiful and enjoyable by everybody who lives here, however they choose to recreate around it. Just, you know, make sure that you are responsible and clean up after yourself and take care of each other, look in and after each other. I know we got the graybeards that, you know, go around in the wintertime if people are needing some assistance. So, you know, just be neighborly.
Be neighborly.
Be neighborly, yep. Bob started to mention the roads. As far as the roads go, you noticed that they did stripe the lake. They did put the traffic markings down. They also put the stop lines down. I know that was a concern of some of the residents. So at the end of the paving season for the highway department, that was part of their final contract where they went around and they striped everything. The speed limit thing is something that it's a work in progress. It's going to take some time It requires state legislature intervention and DOT intervention, and it's really a lot of work. But in the meantime, once again, go back to be neighborly. You know, the speed limit might be 30. You know, it doesn't mean you have to drive the speed limit. You know, we have a lot of people walking out there with their pets at sometimes at night. I would highly recommend that those people who do use the roadways at night wear reflective vests or some sort of reflective clothing, wear a flashlight, walk against traffic, don't walk with traffic, so you can see the oncoming traffic coming at you. And those driving the vehicles, just take it slow. I mean, you really have to work to keep a 30-mile-an-hour constant speed limit around this lake. The limit should probably be more like 20, but if we say that, then let's make our own unofficial speed limit 20. You know?
And we can put up unofficial signs.
We have unofficial signs.
Please go 20, be kind.
Yeah, it's got you know, we have the watch for pedestrian signs that were installed a year or two ago. We have the lower limits for going around the curves and stuff, but you know, just common sense hopefully would prevail with that kind of stuff. You know, thank goodness we haven't had any kind of incidents where somebody was harmed, but I know I've seen you know, people have to jump off the roadway and stuff when cars are coming around those sharp curves. Question?
One last thing. Bobby mentioned earlier we used to have teenagers pulling the weeds out of the lake.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we're going to get any teenagers who want to do that anymore.
Yeah.
There's plenty of people out on the lake, myself included. If somebody put out like a guide of how to properly remove the weeds and what to do with them afterwards,
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people there be more than willing. I mean, we're not going to go through 10 acres of the lake,
Right.
but if you do a little bit
Sure.
in a couple of days, it adds up.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a good idea, but you know, like AJ said, certain weeds, if you pull them, it only makes the problem worse.
These were
Yeah.
floaters. These were the floaters on the surface. They didn't
Yeah.
float. That was dangerous.
Yeah.
at the
So,
time.
yeah.
They just raked up the floaters because we used to have the surface covered. But they had to clear those in order to see them. And nothing else was that. Here they know it. So at least for different. But clearing up weeds is, I think, another issue.
I don't know if it's appropriate now, but recyclables, I'm on Pudding Street, they haven't come for a while.
To pick up recyclables?
Pick up recyclables, so there were a couple of weeks that they missed, and then this past week they missed.
Yeah,
again.
anytime you have a problem with that,
Yeah.
you should call Karen, the district clerk.
Right.
Call them directly.
No, I saw it on Facebook as well, a lot of
Yeah.
people didn't get
Do you have the bulk pickup date?
But you know, Facebook isn't an official channel.
Yeah, no, I
Call the
realize
town and speak to Karen, and you know, they hold the contract with that.
And I've called the carting company in the past, and they're very receptive.
I know, but I was
And they
also
have cameras on the trucks, and they're like, oh yeah,
I
we
know, but I
missed
was
it,
also
come back.
told not to
Oh, okay.
at town hall. So I was
All right, Bob wants part
Hey, there's
two.
one more thing I want to talk about. I sort of forgot. Our website, the RBLPOA website, had a sort of gap in management. The people who used to manage it aren't going to be managing it anymore. I've spoken to them, and they're going to be passing along the credentials to access to be able to make modifications to that site and keep it updated. So I think I'm going to be working with them in the near future to make that happen. Right now, the process for getting a boat tag is through the website, through like a form built into the website. The problem is that the form is no longer being forwarded over to the original spreadsheet that it was intended to. So this year, while some people went on the website to request a boat tag, that request ultimately fell on deaf ears as a result of just a technology snafu. But if you are in need of a current boat tag, you can email the RBLSuper@gmail.com, and they'd be more than happy to get you a boat tag over there. Yeah, like I said, we're gonna be getting access to the website again. We're gonna be either changing that functionality or perhaps even turning that role over to the town. The town actually handles all the boat tagging for the other two districts, Lake Peekskill and Lake Oscawana, but for some reason we were handling our own boat tagging here. We don't know if we want to continue doing that or not. We sort of think it should be their responsibility. So So yeah, so if you've been disappointed by the website and the ability to get a boat tag, it's purely technologically circumstantial, and we're working on getting it resolved. So thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Yeah, I think it's a good idea that we turn it over to the town. They actually, we pay their salaries to do that kind of stuff. So, you know, it's. I think the one complaint that people had was that means that they don't get their tags delivered to their house like we do here. You have to go to town hall and pick them up. Sir.
Hi, I have something totally off topic. It has to do with the bulk pickup. I have, I'll just say, a fair number of LP records, a lot of them. I can't seem to unload them. I tried at all the places that kind of do that stuff. I'm going to put them in the bulk drop-off. If anybody is interested in LPs, you're welcome to have them. But my focus, I have a lot of Broadway musicals. I have a lot of opera, and I know that's not everybody's thing, but it's mine. And I have so many CDs, but I'm not getting rid of those. And I'm going to be putting them out. If I live at 585 Lake Shore, the little green log house on the hill. If anybody is really interested, or if you know anybody, great. Well, I got number one.
Yeah, first dibs.
He can go take a look and see what I got. But otherwise, they're going to be out on the street. And I'm sad.
Yeah.
But that's real. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you. Moving on.
All right, so
I'm David, by the way.
unless anybody has any questions on the roads, we'll have an open forum. Anybody have any comments or questions?
The stilt weed, it might be too late, but can the town cut down some of the stilt weed that they see on the side?
The what?
Stilt weed. Sorry. Stilt.
Are you talking about like with that weeder that the cutter that went through? Yeah, I don't know if they come back. Call Sean up. Call the highway department if there's a specific area, or is it all around?
Well, when you walk around the lake, you see little areas of it.
Yeah. See what they do with that weeder is they will not cut on people's personal property. They'll only cut around district.
Town has a right of way of 50 feet.
Yeah. Well, if it's obstructing views and stuff, they'll cut it, but they're not going to be a landscaper. So if you have a specific issue, talk to them. Sean is really very accommodating for a lot of stuff. So you just call him, talk to the office there.
A couple weeks ago about stilt grass. And it was cut the next day.
Okay, I still see some.
Yeah, so if you got a specific area,
Call
you
them,
know.
tell them where you're seeing
Okay,
it.
thank you.
Okay. Any other? Yes, sir.
Probably preaching to the choir. I live on Short, and a lot of times people coming south from Pudding don't come to a stop at the stop line. And there have been times when I've had the right of way and I have to stop short because someone just plowed right through. I mean, obviously, it's in your own personal interest to come to a full stop there because the visibility is not good, especially that corner between Short and Pudding.
Yeah. Yeah, the four corners there are.
Yeah, they think it's okay to turn on
tough.
right.
Yeah.
We still have to stop.
Yeah.
If they were driving slower, they'd be able to stop.
Well, I mean, that was one of the reasons why we requested that they restripe the stop lines. So besides the stop sign, you have the stop line. But and it goes back to my be neighborly thing again. It's just, that you got to be careful what you wish for. You ask for a cop there. And the cop is just like the carp. They just get everything. So just be careful what you wish for when you ask for stuff like that. Okay. Anything else?
Thank you, Mike.
Great.
Thank you.
So
Thank you, Mike.
our chef de jour are working on the barbecue.
Yeah, we're having a barbecue.
So we give us a few minutes to get everything started. We'll have some burgers and hot dogs, and you know, continue to converse. Hello.
Another thing.
Let me know. Thank you. Got one more year.
I know. I had the countdown going.
Yeah, I got one more year.
I know it's
I appreciate it so much. Hey Bob, you want to turn this off, or you take your phone back? Or?